Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast.
We think when we're putting our charts and graphs out there and we're giving a bunch of data to people, that's going to build our credibility. They actually found the information more credible coming into the form of a story because they could relate to it more. It meant something to them individually. Storytelling helps move your mission, vision, and values from words on the wall to behaviors in the hall so that people can see what you mean by those mission, vision, and value statements. Know who your audience is and what's going to relate to them, but as much as possible, use your own natural language. That will increase the authenticity. It will increase the connection you get from the people you're talking to.
That's Mark Carpenter. He's a serial storyteller who's honed his craft through years in marketing communication, public relations, corporate facilitation, and as a college professor. Today, Mark works as a consultant and speaker to teach others his storytelling insights, shared his best-selling book, Master Storytelling, How to Turn Your Experiences into Stories That Teach, Lead, and Inspire. So you'll learn 1, why stories are more effective than numbers, 2, the science behind why our brains love stories, and 3, the 3 elements of a memorable story. I'm Pete Makaitis. This is How to Be Awesome at Your Job. And now, here's Mark. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Pete. Glad to be here with you.
I'm excited to hear your wisdom on storytelling. And I'd love it if you could start us off with one of your most surprising, fascinating discoveries you've made about storytelling over your whole career of working on this stuff with people.
I think one of the most surprising things that I found is all the research that's there to support it. I got into this just because I practiced it. It was my wife who nudged me to write this book and said, because she was saying, you have this way of taking everyday experiences and turning them into stories that can teach lessons. And my first thought was, well, that's just what people do. And she said, no, you do that. Not everybody does that. And you could help other people to be able to do that more intentionally. And so as I got into the research on the book, I was a little surprised to find out the depth of research behind why storytelling works and why it's so effective in our business settings.
Well, Mark, you're already giving us lessons from a story in that when you said, that's just what people do, and you had a dear, loving, trusted companion, your wife, who said, no, that's what you do. I think that's often the nature of strengths, is that they seem, oh, of course, it's natural to us, but no, really, there's something special there. So look at you, already teaching a lesson with a story, Mark, right off the beginning.
It's what I do, Pete.
That's just what everyone does, right? So we'll lay it on us. What's a particularly striking research tidbit or insight that is really strong?
Ooh, if I can share a couple, I'd love to
sure.
be able to do that. One of them was some research that was done at a university, and off the top of my head, I'm losing which one it was, so I'm not going to try to cite it because I'll probably get it wrong. But they took graduate students and they put them into 3 groups, and they shared with one group a bunch of data, some important information, told them it was really important for them to remember. They took another group, they shared that information with them, but they gave it to them with charts and graphs too. This is what we do in business to help people remember, right? We put it in charts and graphs.
Yeah, PowerPoint. Mm-hmm.
And the third group, they gave them the information in the form of a story. Then they got them back together a couple of weeks later and asked how much they remembered, how accurately they remembered, and what the impact of that information was on them. They found that the first 2 groups really had no statistical difference in how well they remembered or how accurately they remembered, how much they remembered or how accurately they remembered. The third group remembered more of the information, remembered it more accurately. And the surprising thing to me was they found it more credible.
Interesting. More credit. Yeah, that is surprising.
Yeah. We think when we're putting our charts and graphs out there and we're giving a bunch of data to people, that's going to build our credibility. They actually found the information more credible coming into the form of a story because they could relate to it more. It meant something to them individually. It wasn't just a bunch of numbers or a bunch of information. They could see the relation to themselves, and that's why they found it more credible. So that was one of the surprising findings that I discovered in the research that we did for the book. The other one is the work of Dr. Paul Zak, who has investigated what's going on inside people's brains.
Oh, oxytocin.
Yeah. The oxytocin guy.
A former guest on How to Be Awesome at Your Job, so he must be a good guy.
Oh, he's a fabulous guy. I love listening. I'll take me a dose of Dr. Zach just about any time. I love listening to that man. But he discovered that there were 3 changes that happen inside of our brains when we hear a well-told story. The first one is an increase in oxytocin. And we get that by hearing a relatable story, a relatable situation with relatable characters. So you hear somebody tell a story and you think, oh, yeah, boy, I've been there. I've been in that kind of situation before. We get an increase of oxytocin in our brains. The cool thing is that increases your trust. So as people are listening to your well-told story, they trust you more because of that increase of oxytocin.
Well, I'm struggling because I'm thinking, I don't want to poke the bear here, but someone I know was listening to a podcaster who's been semi-canceled. And I think potentially justifiably in terms of, okay, that was kind of beyond the pale. But he told a story I totally related to. I was like, oh, well, maybe this guy's not so bad. I was like, is that all it took? Was that all it took? I was like, wow. I was struck by my own reaction. And here you are saying, well, no, Pete, there's biochemical stuff at work here that this is quite normal.
So you've just given a great example of how that happens.
Yeah.
You've seen it in reality. You also see it when you see somebody on the street and they're wearing logo apparel of your alma mater or your favorite sports team. And all of a sudden you like that person because you can relate to them. There's just that little relatability that comes in. So that's one of the powers of storytelling. 2 other things that Dr. Zach identified. When you introduce a little bit of conflict, a little bit of risk in that story, which is what makes the story interesting, the listener has an increase of cortisol in their brains, and just a little bit. And the effect of the cortisol is it makes people pay attention more in small doses. Too much cortisol, it stresses them out. But a little bit of cortisol will make people pay more attention to what you're saying. So it's no wonder people remember better when they hear things in a story, because they're paying more attention. And then finally, when you get to a good resolution to your story, people get an increase in dopamine, that neurotransmitter that gives you that kind of feeling of satisfaction. When there's a satisfying ending that comes to that story, that there's a lesson learned or there's a good resolution to that story, it's like leveling up on the video game or checking off something on your to-do list. You get a little sense of dopamine. And that's what connects people into stories. We all know we like stories, but Dr. Zach's research shows why. What's going on with us chemically that really makes stories attractive to us.
That is so good. That is so good and intriguing in terms of the credibility piece specifically. Well, tell us then, when it comes to professionals, I think they'd say, well, yeah, stories are fun, Mark. I'd like to hear more. I'd like to be able to tell more, but really, how much of an impact is that going to make for my career? And how do I pull it off?
Well, and our book's subtitle is How to Turn Your Experiences into Stories That Teach, Lead, and Inspire. So if you're in a position where you need to teach, lead, and inspire, and if I had it to do it all over again, I would add sell in there as well. Teach, lead, sell, and inspire. Then storytelling can be effective for you. And we're not talking about creating fables. There's great business books out there that are business fables, but that's not the kind of storytelling we're talking about. We're talking about taking your real life experience and being able to turn them into stories that people can relate to, that they can learn something from, that will inspire some action, that will lead to some change. And so those are the kind of stories that we're talking about specifically in our book, Master Storytelling. So if you have a position where you need to do those things, and by the way, who doesn't, then storytelling can be of great impact to you. Think of it this way. I'm going to go kind of a baseline for everybody that's in business has had to go through this, the job interview. You prep for that job interview and you get in your mind what questions they're going to ask, and you get your straight answers and how you're going to deliver those answers. But I pretty much guarantee your answers are going to be almost exactly the same as the person who was interviewed right before you, unless you answer the question in the form of, well, let me share a story about an experience that I had that illustrates that. When they ask you about, so what do you feel like is your greatest strength? Oh, we all want to say things like, well, I'm a really hard worker. But what if you said, Well, one of the things that I've been praised for by other people is the level of attention to detail that I give. For example, and then share an experience where you gave a high level of detail to something and were praised for it. Your interviewer will remember that better than the person who says, well, I'm really detail oriented. I'm really good at getting to the details and solving problems.
Mark, I love that. And in some ways, the storytelling sounds so lofty. We think of, Stephen King or just banging away at a typewriter. I'm sure he uses a word processor now, but the heroic novelist going through draft after draft and throwing them into the wastebasket, or Hollywood, or I'm thinking about like The Moth or epic keynoters on the TED stage. But what you did there was so easy. You made a statement and you said, for example, and boom, and you go right into story. And in some ways, the word example feels a little bit less lofty and intimidating than story, but they're the same thing.
Absolutely. And we're pretty practiced at telling stories. We come home from a busy day and family or friends say, hey, how was your day? And we tell them kind of the story of the day. But in that situation, we're really just relating the experience. But if I need to teach a lesson from that, I'm going to be more intentional about the parts that I leave out, the parts that I leave in, and make sure I get to the point at the end of that situation or that story. And so we're not looking at those epic novels or epic tales. We're looking at those day-to-day things that people can relate to that will help them remember a point that you're trying to make and really lead to some action.
Okay. Well, now this is maybe the most meta question ever, Mark. We're talking about storytelling. Can you tell us a story of someone who improved their storytelling skills and saw really cool benefits to their career as a result?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of an organization I worked with just last year. They had an annual event where they would bring people in from each of the different divisions to present to the leadership team about what their part of the organization was doing to drive forward the mission of the organization. And what they found was a lot of people were standing up and saying, oh, our organization is doing these wonderful things. And they'd try to give some numbers behind it and give some kind of lofty words to it. And the person that was organizing that said, I really want people to start telling a story, to give an illustration. And so they selected people who had an example of something that happened, a specific event that happened within their organization. And I took them through my workshop and coached them on telling that story. And she said that event was totally different this year than all the other years. Most of the time, the leadership team is sitting there kind of leaning back in their chairs, a little bit of a bored expression on their face. This time they were leaning in. And what they found was they were taking these words on the wall that were the mission statement and actually turning them into behaviors in the hall that people could see and relate to and understand. And it really drove a lot of energy in the company around their mission, vision, and values.
I think that is a fine instance because mission, vision, values can really get fluffy. Like, what do we even mean by that? It's like, no, here's what we mean by exceptional customer service. Get a load of this. Someone bought some shoes, but their dog died. And so we looked them up on Instagram and drew a picture. I think this is a real Zappos story. And we drew a picture of their dog and them wearing their shoes. And we said, hey, hope you have fond memories of Fido or whatever. It was like, oh, that's what you mean by exceptional customer service. And not just listening and saying, oh, I understand you're frustrated, sir. Gotcha. Now it's much more clear and memorable. I'm remembering this from years ago. See?
There you go. See, you see how sticky stories are? And I love what you said, because it does. It takes the mission, vision, values from words on the wall to behaviors in the hall. This is what it sounds like, but this is what it looks like.
That's good. Well, so tell us fundamentally what makes a story good versus disappointing.
Yeah. And so I'll start with the research of Dr. Zach and what he's talked about. Because if you think of those 3 chemical reactions that we have in our brains, we need to tap into those. So how do you tap into the oxytocin? You create an experience that people can relate to with people they can relate to and a situation or a problem they can relate to. So what's their worthwhile goal? What are they trying to accomplish? And you set this up in the beginning of sharing your experience. Here's where we were. Here's where we were trying to get. And people can make the connection to, oh yeah, I've been in that similar situation. Then you need to introduce some conflict. Something has to get in the way of that goal, or the story is pretty boring. It doesn't have much energy to it. So what is it that gets in the way of accomplishing that goal? We call this the conflict. And so that conflict comes in, and that's what makes people pay attention, because they're going, what's going to happen? How are we going to get to the end of this? And then the third part is what we call the change. What happens to bring resolution to that? Or what happened that it didn't resolve right, but we learned something from that we can change going forward? Where was the mistake that we made that we can learn from in the future? Because that's going to bring in the dopamine as well, and help people walk away with, yeah, I want to make sure that I do the right thing, so that I don't have that same problem that Mark ended up with in the experience that you shared.
Mark, I love this so much. I love just making it simple, simple, simple. So when it comes to good stories I've heard about, Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey, is like, that's a lot of steps. And then Dan Harmon's got an 8-part story circle model. And I've done that with my 5 and 6-year-old. It's kind of fun. But 8 is still a lot of steps. But Mark, you said we got 3. All right. Set the scene.
That's what we've narrowed it down to, for that very reason. You're telling a story that lasts 2 to 3 minutes. It's hard to fit 8 steps into 2 to 3 minutes. Now, nothing wrong with that 8-step process, but for the purposes of the types of stories that I'm talking about, we needed something really simple.
All right. So step 1, we set the scene with a relatable people, relatable situation, relatable problem. Step 2, we've got a conflict, something that gets in the way of what we're after. And step 3, we have a change, either because of like an insight and victory, or, oh, oopsie daisy, disappointing failure, and then learning that comes from that. So Mark, I'd love it if you could just give us maybe several examples of, we've got a business situation, and I might tell the tale with slides and charts and data, but you instead give us our 3-step stories that get the job done better. No pressure. Go.
No pressure. Just come up with it right out of the blue here. Which story do I want to go with? I'll go with one that I've been telling recently, and it's actually not one of my stories. It's actually a friend of mine. So here's another tip that I can throw to your listeners. The stories don't always have to be yours. You can borrow from other people, and just think of how you're crafting that story, and then acknowledge it, that it comes from another person. So I've been talking a lot about the importance of leading with greater humanity. I call it leading like a person, not like a position. And a friend of mine was telling me about a leader that he had. He actually left a company because the leadership was very much in the command and control mode and would fire people on the spot very publicly. He left that company, went over to another company that was actually a competitor. And he had an opportunity 3 months into this position to introduce the CEO at a big partners conference. So they had hundreds of their best partners in the room. He was giving the introduction to the CEO. He'd prepped it. He'd memorized it. He'd worked with the CEO on the details for it. He was feeling really good about it, feeling like this is an opportunity to be seen and to show his value to this new company. He gets through the introduction, and just as he's introducing the CEO, he says, "Please welcome the CEO of," and he says the name of his last company.
Oh, yoy.
All right, you feeling the pain right there? There's our conflict that just came into the story, right?
That's so relatable, Mark.
And hundreds of partners go boo and start boo. And he realized what he'd done, and he's humiliated. Now, he recovered from it quickly by saying, "Of course we know he wouldn't work for that company he's the CEO of." And he said the name of the right company, introduced the CEO. The CEO walks on stage and shakes his hand, and then he walks off. But as he was walking off, everyone is kind of avoiding him. And he's thinking, because of the experience that he had at his previous company, this is it. This is the end for me. I'm going to get fired as soon as the CEO's done speaking. He found a quiet place away from other people and started thinking about his next career moves as the CEO's giving this hour-long speech. The CEO comes off the stage and very intentionally starts looking around until he finds my friend Nick. And he walks right to him. And Nick's thinking, here it comes. Here it comes. And the CEO puts his arms around him, whispers in his ear, don't worry about it. We've all done it. We've all made these kind of mistakes. You're fine. It's okay. That's what I call leading like a person. And we all love to have leaders like that because we will go to bat for leaders like that. So if you want people to really give their best, that's the kind of leader you want to be.
Beautifully done, Mark. So here we have the situation. I can relate. Hey, I want to make a great impression. You have an opportunity. That's really cool. And then, oopsies, made a mistake, feel really bad about it. Uh-oh, what's going to happen? And then humanity on full display. And we feel good. And he's like, oh yeah, I like that. And it's like, I too would like to be that kind of a leader, Mark. Go on. There we are.
Yep. And good job picking up those 3 phases that are right in there. Once you know them, they're actually fairly obvious within the story structure. But it just makes it, as we were talking about, an easy way to organize your thoughts so that you can make it concise. I'll add to that the important thing to keep in mind is, what is the lesson I'm trying to teach here? Well, what is my end goal? Because that will help you edit out extraneous information that happened within the experience. You sometimes hear people make that mistake where they're telling a story. They want to give every single detail in it. And you're thinking, why is that relevant? Or where is that going? And I refer to it as they don't land the plane. They're just flying around their story and they're not getting to the point. So you have to know what runway you're landing on, and that will help you get to the point more efficiently.
All right. Thank you. Well, maybe let's do just that and say, we're trying to make a point to an executive, a leader, or an organization that something's got to change. And I'll try to get more specific, Mark, so that you can really work with this. Something needs to change, and we need to invest significantly in innovation, a new product service offering, or we're going to be in trouble. And we can't just keep comfy cozy and expect that recurring revenue we've thought was great to continue forever if we just continue living in isolation and not creating new cool stuff. So that's the impact I'm trying to get is folks, because they wake up, take action. We got to do something and stop just living the status quo. There seems to be some foot dragging and some comfort and risk aversion. So that's the transformation I want. How can I make a story to help me do this, Mark?
Well, there's a couple of different ways that you can approach that. Number one, look at another organization that didn't take those steps and has now failed. I could easily tell the story of Blockbuster Video. That's a very well-known story that shows that they were, nope, we are kingpins, we are cruising, we are just fine. You Netflix people are never going to make it. And I would get into some of the details of that. And where's Blockbuster now? Because they weren't willing to innovate, and they looked at streaming as it's a fad that's never gonna fly. People want to come to a store and get their DVDs to go home and watch them. I think it's a classic example of people not innovating. If you can find one within your organization, if you can find a situation where we lost this customer because we didn't have this level of innovation, we didn't have this direction of going forward. As you were talking about that, I was even thinking of a very specific example the years ago that I faced, where there was a company that had just laid off a third of their workplace. And we talked to them about why. And they said, because no one's willing to tell the CEO that he doesn't have good innovative ideas. It's like, what do you mean? What happens? Well, the CEO comes in and says, hey, I've got this great idea. Here's what I think we should do. He presents the idea, and everybody's thinking, that's never going to work, but we really like this guy, so we can't tell him no. And so we're going to just try to make it work. And it keeps them from innovating on new products. And so their revenue keeps going down, and they ended up just laying off a third of their workplace because they weren't able to have the tough conversations, basically tell the emperor that he has no clothes and that the idea is not going to work. They need to expand into new areas. And it ended up putting that company at risk. And they eventually did go out of business. I wasn't as invested with them when they went out of business, so I'm not sure exactly what happened there. But I know that created struggles for them to just keep up with the market.
Yeah. So this is really good. And it's true, as opposed to a fable. So, Mark, help us out in terms of we think, okay, there's a transformation that we're going for. We think a story would be cool. We understand the 3 steps, but I need some source material. How do you recommend we doing the research, the scouting, the finding of the potential story subject matter to start working on?
That's a great question that I get all the time. And the question that I usually get is, well, nothing ever happens in my life. I don't have any stories that I can tell. And I usually say, well, then you're just not looking for them. Pay attention. The stories are there. Do some research. Look at other companies. The internet is such a great resource for some of those things. Ask other people. As we were writing the book, in fact, I included this in the book. A friend of mine shared an experience where he was looking for an illustration of a specific point. And the point that he was trying to make was, where has a well-intentioned action backfired on somebody? And he was looking for examples, couldn't find anything. Over dinner, he mentioned it to his wife, and she said, "Oh, I've got an example." And she just had a perfect example for him to share. Ask other people. Open yourself up to those things. I had an interesting situation where I was in a trainer certification, was leading this trainer certification. And one of the activities that each participant had to do was to deliver a portion of the content and include a story to illustrate the point that they were trying to make. This one participant said, "Well, can I just make them up?" And I said, "No, I want this to be a real experience." And it scared her to death. She was like, I don't know where I'm going to come up with a real experience. Usually when I tell stories, I just make them up. And somebody else in the room said, "I'm not sure how credible that would be." So we talked about looking for your examples. Look for those moments where you have an emotional reaction to something.
Yeah.
There's a lesson embedded in that.
That's good.
And capture those. Hold on to them. You may not need it now, but you will in the future. The funny thing is about this one participant in this trainer certification, she came back the next day, told a great story of something that had happened to her the night before on the elevator in the hotel where we were holding this conference. And because she was looking for it, after that experience happened, she realized, that's my story. That illustrates the point that I'm trying to make. But if she hadn't been looking for it, she wouldn't have noticed it. If you're looking for it, it's almost like the universe sends you the examples that you need, because these lessons just exist in our day-to-day lives.
That's really cool. Think about the strong emotional reactions. And I'm thinking the same way you get ideas for anything, you just like strike it with a stimulus and see what you got. So I've been doing a little bit of journaling and thinking about timelines and different phases of life. And what was I really into when I was 10 and versus 16? And I think that could maybe spark some things in terms of shaking off the myopia associated with the here and now and the day-to-day of what's up. And then when you go external, stories about businesses or whatever outside, I was impressed. Boy, there's a lot of talk of AI and ChatGPT and whatever. And I've had really mixed results with this stuff in terms of what it's good at, what it's not. But one thing that's been very good, I think, is first I asked for quantity, because I was like, give me 10 examples of people who had a transformation in their speaking ability, what they did, and the impact it made. And I was really cool. It told me stuff like, oh, well, Warren Buffett took a Dale Carnegie course and he thought it was so transformational that he says it's the only degree, diploma, certificate he has hanging in his office was from his Dale Carnegie course. It's like, okay, this is a little on the nose, ChatGPT. Is this even real? And so I looked it up. I was like, sure enough, it was. And it was like, I had no idea. And that's a great one. So, and even if when AI fails me, which it does more often than not, it just trying helps spark fresh ideas for me. It's like, no, that's no good, but you're reminding me of something. Thank you. And then it served its purpose.
Exactly. And I'm glad you said that you validated that story before you used it, because that's what I encourage people to do. Yeah, use AI as a way to generate ideas, to generate possibilities. The problem is sometimes that's what AI is doing. They're generating possibilities. So they may come back with a story that is this could be true. So make sure before you use anything that AI generates for you, that you validate that it actually is true, that it actually did happen. I have heard that story about Warren Buffett. So I was thinking that it was true, but sometimes it'll generate examples for you that could be truths, not necessarily are truths.
Yes, exactly. It reminds me of when people tell me a story about myself in the past that I don't actually remember. And I say, I don't remember that happening, but it does kind of sound like me. And I don't think you're lying. So I'll just assume that in fact is what happened. But with AI, I could sometimes just totally fabricate things. So certainly do your research and confirm it. Next, I want to get your take on, in the process of preparing our stories, to what extent do we want to write out, record, transcribe, rehearse? Like, what does prep look like? And can you do too much such that it's unnatural and less effective? How do you think about story prep?
It's different for different people. Some people love to just write out their story word for word and then practice it until it's natural and it comes in a flow to them. Other people, bullet points are fine. However, for everyone, practice is essential. It is essential to practice it, to get those words out of your mouth, to formulate them in a way that sounds natural, that sounds normal, and that makes the connections that you want to make. We have great tools to help us with that. You have friends, practice it in front of friends, tell the story to somebody else and see how it lands with them. Take out your phone, turn on that selfie mode and record yourself and listen back to it. You will pick up a lot that way in terms of, that phrase didn't work like I thought it was going to. That sounded a lot better in my head than it did coming out of my mouth. So practice it so that it does become natural. To your point, yes, you can over rehearse it to where it sounds like I'm just dictating to you from a piece of paper instead of actually having the emotion that comes with a story. A couple of years ago, a friend of mine was asking me to coach him a little bit on a presentation that he was going to give. And the advice that he was given was, you need to memorize this word for word. And it was really interesting listening to him because I know this person well, that I found it unnatural. And there were times where he'd get to a sentence and he'd go, and you could tell he was searching for the exact word. But if it's your experience and it's your story, and you're comfortable sharing it with that structure, that 3-part structure that I talked about, it will come out much more natural than if you're memorizing the words. And it's much more relatable that way as well.
And when it comes to word choice, any pro tips? I don't know if there's any favorite words or phrases or things to avoid. I guess reading words or copy in general, I find buzzwords really challenging and unpleasant and a turnoff. Like, you're looking for a way to leverage omni-channel support to increase the ROI of da-da-da-da-da. It's like, this is not working for me. Maybe it's written for somebody else who's like, yes, that's exactly what I'm looking for. But how do you think about words to use and words to lose?
Use the words that are natural for you.
All right.
That's the biggest advice that I can give you there. If you're putting in buzzwords, you're likely using words that you would not normally use, and that will come across. You'll lose your authenticity when you do that. So use the words that are natural for you. Now, also be careful about inclusive language. Don't use words that are going to turn people off. A friend of mine was giving a presentation to a group of Microsoft employees and made some comment in the middle of a story about, so I Googled it. That's not what you want to say to people who work at Microsoft. Okay. If instead she had said, I did an internet search, and not use the G word to the Microsoft employees, it wouldn't have been as bad. But she just got a really negative reaction. People went, oh, just right out loud. And she didn't realize what she'd done initially until she replayed it and went, oh, yeah, that's not the word I should have used here. So that's the caution that I give around word choice, is know who your audience is and what's going to relate to them. But as much as possible, use your own natural language. That will increase the authenticity. It will increase the connection you get from the people you're talking to.
Well, Mark, tell me any final do's and don'ts you want to share about storytelling.
I think the biggest do, be intentional. Just be intentional about why you're telling the story. Don't tell stories just to tell stories. We know they're fun. And there is a time and a place to just tell stories to tell stories. But when you're using a story to teach, lead, sell, and inspire, be intentional about what you're trying to get to. What is the point that you're trying to make? And the more intentional you can be, the better your stories are going to land. And the more it's going to create a positive impact for you and the goals that you're trying to achieve.
Mark's about to share his favorite things. One of my favorite things is our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Harvard Business Review. This brilliant magazine, published at hbr.org, is the leading destination for smart management thinking. Fun fact, HBR has been mentioned in 108 episodes of the show. That's because HBR has great stuff that comes up often. They've got explainer videos, podcasts, real-world case studies, and much more. I think of HBR each night that I put on my special orange glasses. Their article, Will Blue Light Glasses Improve Your Sleep?, revealed that those who wore them reported better sleep and a 7% improvement in work performance as compared to those who wore the sham glasses. So I cite HBR anytime anyone tells me that I look silly wearing them. Now, much of HBR's content is available for free when you sign up at their site. Subscriptions that get you unlimited content cost $10 a month. If you visit hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME, you can save 10% off of that subscription. Again, to save 10% off of your HBR subscription, go to www.hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME. One sponsor to check out is Storyworth. Whenever I'm thinking about meaningful Father's Day gifts, Storyworth leaps to mind. Storyworth helps you preserve precious memories and stories from your father for years to come. Each week, Storyworth emails your loved ones a thought-provoking question that you get to help pick, such as, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? I personally love the prompt so much that I have refreshed Storyworth's questions page many times looking for more. Storyworth makes the writing process super quick and easy. All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story, and then you get a quick copy of that. And after a year of this fun, Storyworth compiles your loved one's stories and photos into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you'll be able to share and revisit for generations to come. Families love Storyworth so much, they've got 25,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot and have millions of stories preserved. So give all the fathers in your life a unique, heartfelt gift they'll all cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, you can save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/awesome. That's storyworth.com/awesome to save $10 on your first purchase. And big thanks to our sponsor, Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. You don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invests your money for you. NerdWallet.com, whom I love on these sorts of matters, gives Acorns a whopping 4.7 stars and says, quote, if you want to make the most of your spare change, there's no better place to do that than Acorns. Head to acorns.com/awesome or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. And we got a legal disclaimer here. It may not be representative of all clients. Tier 1 compensation provided. Compensation provides an incentive to positively promote Acorns. View important disclosures at acorns.com/awesome. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Please consider your objectives, risk tolerance, and Acorns' fees before investing. Acorns Advisors LLC, Acorns, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Brokerage services are provided to clients of Acorns by Acorns Securities LLC, member FINRA/SIPC. For more information, visit acorns.com. Lovely. All right. Well, Mark, now can you share with us a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
There is one that I've leaned on a lot when times get tough. We always get into rush times. One of my college professors, a great person named Ray Beckham, he gave us this advice as we were graduating. He said, when you get into rush situations, when you get in emergency situations, remember these words: hurry, but don't panic. And that's one of my favorite quotes: hurry, but don't panic.
And a favorite book?
This is one that changes over time too, because I read a lot. And so it's usually my favorite, most recent book. Love the book that I've just read. It's called How to Listen by Oscar Trimboli.
Oh, Oscar, yeah. On the show. Good guy.
And have you had Oscar on your podcast?
Yeah.
Love Oscar Trimboli too. I think he's a great thought leader, and he wrote a marvelous book about how to be more intentional about listening to other people.
All right. And a favorite tool, something you use to be awesome at your job?
This is going to sound almost too light, but I love the Notes app on my phone. I use that to capture those moments when I have an emotional reaction to an experience. And I say, there's a story there. I just have a little folder in there that says stories for someday. And I just love to just capture that in there with a quick note that someday I'll come back to when I'm looking for a story, and I'll find an experience there that I can use.
And a favorite habit?
I think it's just intentionally being grateful for something every day, and just acknowledging what I'm grateful for. It really helps me to have a better day.
Okay. And is there a key nugget you share that really seems to connect and resonate with folks? They quote it back to you often?
It's one that I shared a little bit earlier, that storytelling helps move your mission, vision, and values from words on the wall to behaviors in the hall, so that people can see what you mean by those mission, vision, and value statements.
All right. And Mark, if folks want to learn more or get in touch, where would you point them?
Start with our website, master-storytelling.com. So you have to have a little dash between master and storytelling. That's a great place. We've got some free resources there. We've got a little document called the Story Catcher that helps you to be more intentional about capturing those events in your life and turning them into stories that will teach, lead, sell, and inspire. So I'd love to have people come out and get that free resource and connect with me. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Look for Mark Carpenter and Sandy, Utah, and you'll find me. You'll see a copy of the Master Storytelling book cover behind me.
All right. And a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
Tell your stories. We've all got them. And so be intentional about looking for those experiences that you can turn into stories that teach, lead, sell, and inspire, and look for opportunities to use those to accomplish your goals.
All right, Mark, this has been tons of fun. I wish you many lovely stories.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the time, Pete.
I love those 3 simple steps. We don't need dozens of steps or even the 8-part story circle, which is cool. Thanks, Dan Harmon. Check that out sometime for funsies on YouTube. But set the foundation, introduce the conflict, and resolve the conflict. What's the goal? What's getting in the way of that goal? And then how do we bring a resolution to that? Simple, effective, handy, and making the brain squirt all those potent chemicals so it's memorable and effective and cool. Powerful stuff from Mark. If you would like a summary write-up of the actionable wisdom of this conversation, as well as access to the whole vault of these summaries, we call those the Gold Nuggets, available right at awesomeatyourjob.com. Or if you'd like to read the transcript and see the links to stuff we mentioned in this episode, drop on by our show notes at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP948. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full-text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.